Hello, Aengus from Nature Northwest, and we're here, and well, not to talk about saplings as such, but other things. Anyway, I hope you're doing well.
Oh, very good, John.
Hope you enjoyed the summer at the weekend.
It was lovely, all 2 days of it, 3 days of it.
It was brilliant. It was glorious.
It was, that little blast of heat, and it'll have done not just us good, it'll have done nature good too. I had house martins nesting, and they built their little mud house on the side of my house, up above in the north end of the house, north side of the house. And they started building on the summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, which is the 20th of June this year. And they started building then, and they finally left there, I think it was about the 26th of August. So that's how long it took them from laying down the first few balls of mud. It took a couple of weeks then to build the nest, and then the eggs, and then rearing the chicks. But every day I've heard them overhead, especially in the evening time. They come back and roost, sleep in the same area. And you can hear the chicks, and the chicks are still begging off mum and dad. So they need this little bit of warmth.
So they're the ones that make the nest that looks like a cone.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Like a honeycomb maybe. Nearly.
Yeah, stuck onto the wherever the gable or whatever.
Stuck onto the outside of the house. The swallows will go into the barn, into the shed, whereas the house martin, which is very like a swallow, really doesn't have as long a tail, and they'll build a little mud house on the edge of your own house. 2,000 to 3,000 balls of mud they gather up and stick on with their sticky saliva. And if you think about it, there's at least 4 chicks in there, plus maybe mum in there as well. So there's quite a weight of birds stuck onto the house, stuck onto the plastic.
When you think about the sort of summer we had and the extreme, in many ways, the extremes of weather, and that wee bit of mud stuck up, high on the side of the house, survived it all.
Able to survive it all the rain that we had. And then the fact that they're able to get enough insects. And they can't forage in amongst the bushes or the hedges like the robin or the chaffinch can, They just have to collect everything that's in the sky. And if it's not there, well, then they're bunched. So there's enough food for them, enough life for them floating above our heads, which is amazing to think.
So that's where they gather their food?
On the wing.
Flight,
on the wing. Yeah, no, they can land. They're not like the swifts, which can't actually land on the ground. So both the swallows and the house martins can land. And you'll see them sometimes over, if water is calm, you'll see them scooping up a little bit of water over a river, over a lake if it's still. But they catch all of their food in the sky. Yeah. So hence they'll be gone the next few weeks because it'll be too cold for the bugs, so too cold for them.
Heading off to
Africa. Yeah.
Right. The bit of weather the weekend was perfect for berries, and we're blessed with blackberries in this case for the most part. But we're blessed with lots of, not blessed I suppose, but we have lots of briars where the blackberries grow here in Ireland, because we have lots and lots of hedgerows, great hedgerows, and hedgerows that have lasted centuries.
Some of them go back centuries and centuries. And when you look up, if you look up the maps, the oldest Ordnance Survey maps of Ireland, we're lucky in Ireland. We have pretty good mapping that goes back about 200 years, a little over 200 years. So you can look up your own area and you can see how the roads have changed. You can see how the rivers have changed. You can see how the field boundaries have changed. And when you look at a lot of the old town boundaries, and then if you go into the town now, of course, has massively expanded, whatever town it is or village it is. But those old town boundaries will be there, and those old town boundaries often have some very, very old hedgerow, which might even be a little bit of ancient woodland that was once there.
Right. And they're a great place for wildlife and for nature to thrive, because they provide shelter and sustenance.
They're hugely important because, as we've often mentioned on the show, so much of our nature is woodland nature. And so much of Ireland was covered in woods once upon a time, and an awful lot of our insect life, our bird life and whatnot has adapted for that. We've changed it over thousands of years. We've removed the woodland, but we've kept in place these hedgerows, and they act like little linear habitats that connect up patches of woodland, connect up patches of wetland or whatever type of habitat creatures are looking for, and in their own right provide shelter for not just birds, but for the insects, for the spiders, for all the rest of them.
And small animals.
And small animals, hugely important. So our smallest mammal, the pygmy shrew, that needs to eat every 3 hours, at least, every 3 hours. Its little metabolism works so fast that if it hasn't eaten within 2 to 3 hours, it starves. So it's constantly on the go. It takes tiny little naps and then on the go again. And it's eating up those little wireworms, the little black millipedes that people are seeing around at the moment. It's eating up the woodlice, it's eating up the bugs, the beetles. So they're our friends, but they need that bit of shelter underneath the hedge.
And then, you know, slightly bigger animals, I'm thinking about, you know, the hedgehogs and foxes and badgers and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. And badgers, or often hedgerows, will hold a badger set, and a set is the name for their warren, effectively, their series of holes, which can be very, very old. Just like the hedgerow itself, because they'll be used multi-generational, they'll be used again and again. But the hedgehogs, are classic for it, and the hedgehogs are one of the few animals that hibernate. And we think of squirrels or badgers and things hibernating. They don't really hibernate as such. They might slow down in the wintertime. The likes of squirrels might build up a stock of food, and have longer sleeps in the winter. But the hedgehog is one of the few animals that truly hibernate, shuts down altogether, and its whole body system slows right down. Along with bats and hedgehogs are the ones that do that. So this time of year, the hedges and the food that's in them is vital, because if they don't build up enough of a fat reserve, well, then they won't survive for 3 or 4 months without eating.
And hedgerows, in a way, there's something that we almost just take for granted. Do they need, like, for a hedgerow to thrive? Does it need maintenance, and does it need, you know, a little bit of care now and again?
It does, yeah. And we've often discussed about the idea of rewilding, and how that can frighten people who've worked land for generation after generation. And the idea of just turning your back on it to see what happens with nature would frustrate an awful lot of people. Hedgerows, along with so many of our habitats, have been managed forever. And we need to keep managing them. And if you can see through a hedgerow, it's not a healthy hedgerow. That's the way to kind of put it. And the way that they say you should try and manage a hedgerow is you cut it on one side 1 year, you cut it on another side another year, and you cut it on the top the third year. And you cut it in a little kind of a triangle formation, so a bit wider at the base, and going up as tall as you can allow then. But by not mastering it, chopping it right down every year, you're going to help it thicken up, and you're going to help with a whole variety of species in there.
Which doesn't really work along the road, because if it's along the road, obviously that the roadside has to be cut.
Yeah, safety is essential, and safety has to be cut. And so often you'll see people cutting hedgerows, especially at corners, around about July or so, when growth is really going. And from now on, the hedgerow cutting season is open. But I'd urge people, if it's not a safety issue, if it's and if it is a safety issue, of course you have to deal with it. And if it is impinging on people trying to cycle or walk or whatever, or scraping on vehicles, that's no good. But if possible, leave them for another few weeks if you can, if it's an option, if safety isn't a problem. Certainly on the inside of the fields or in your garden, leave them as long as you can, because there's a huge number of birds out there, and there's a huge number of insects out there, just like the hedgehogs, that are trying to build up their store for the winter or before they reproduce, in the case of some of the insects.
And around about this time, I get frustrated when the hedges are cut, because it takes away all the blackberries. And I was just noticing on Saturday, and it takes the sunshine to really bring them out, because the blackberry season, it doesn't last that long, you know, a few weeks really. And they're just perfect now.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the sunshine over the few days there really helped to bring them on, and they're just nice and big and juicy. I think they're at their optimum now.
They're perfect at the moment. And it's one of the greatest pleasures to go out just on your own, go out with your children, go out with people. It's free food. Be a little bit careful that people haven't been spraying. There's less and less now. In fairness, people are getting more and more aware of the dangers of spraying some of the nastier chemicals that we have. Occasionally they are necessary, but just be aware that there hasn't been spray roundups and things like that used in the field or at the roadside. But once you're fairly sure, and you'll know from your own local area and walking your local area,
if it's green around, you're fine.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the brambles are a fantastic thing. And it's not just for us. Of course, all of those fruits, they contain seeds. And we don't really think of that when it comes to blackberries or raspberries or strawberries. But of course, if you look at a strawberry, you look at the amount of seeds that are embedded on the outside of it. So they're all just a very clever way that nature has evolved to trick an animal into eating this little reward. And then by eating that reward, it has to dispose of the seeds somehow. It either spits them out, or in some cases the seeds pass through the little system of the animal. And that way they're distributed. Because a challenge that all plants have is, how do they spread their seeds out? And the dandelions, they blow in the wind, of course, but not all of them can do that.
And it's such a simple way of getting children introduced to nature as well, because, you know, you're out picking blackberries, and now at the moment, a lot of them are when they're at their ripest, they're very sweet. And
very sweet.
Yeah, and that's just as they are now. So go for the big ones. And then when you're out picking blackberries as well, there's a good chance you'll run into maybe a blueberry bush.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've bilberry out there, and bilberry or frockin, and that's Ireland's blueberry. You'll get those more so in woodlands, really, and sometimes the edges of bogs and whatnot as well. And you'll get these tiny, tiny little blueberries.
They're hard to spot.
They are hard to spot.
The
Yeah,
leaves are very small, but they're still there. The fruit's hard to spot.
they're tiny little things, but it's worth searching, and that's where it's brilliant to bring children with you, as you say, to educate them, to get them used to the fact that food doesn't come from a shop or doesn't come from a package. It comes from the fields, it comes from our farmers, it comes from the ground, and in some cases it comes from our hedges. So for them to learn that is a great exercise, to get used to the fact that you might get a couple of scratches if you're getting the brambles, but it's worth it. You'll get your reward. And it's always great to have children on any kind of nature walk, because they'll spot things you won't see. First of all, they're much lower down than us. And second, their own curiosity and their sharp young eyesight, they'll pick up things that you'll be walking past.
And then, in the case of berries, they're great to freeze, and you can keep them for smoothies or making jam or tarts, whatever. Just don't do like I did and forget about them until the next year.
Into the porridge in the morning.
That's what we've been doing, rather than freezing them. We've just been
brilliant.
taking a handful and out for a walk there with the dog in the evening, and taking them home and having the next morning.
Yeah, and it's back to school time, and people are trying to reset their menu at home, perhaps, and reset their eating habits, and try and get out of all the treats that have been going on this summer. And a great way to do that is go for a little nature walk over the weekend, collect a load of blackberries with your children, stick them in the freezer, stick them in the fridge, and they can throw a few into the porridge every morning, and it makes the porridge very tasty. And there's competitions in my house to see who can make the porridge go pink first by stirring up the blackberries, this kind of thing. It adds a bit of fun into it, and suddenly, before you know it, they're eating a huge, big, healthy bowl of porridge, and they're delighted with themselves.
Yeah, nothing better in the morning. Now, someone says, I'm overrun by bats. This is in their home day and night. Well, how can I get rid of them?
The bats will go naturally themselves. They're a protected species, so you're not allowed to touch them, you're not allowed to get rid of them. However, that's very frustrating if they're coming into the house. Bats are often up in attics of houses and people don't know, but come around about mid or end of July or so, the young bats that have been up in that attic, been born in that attic, and they start exploring and flying around the place. And oftentimes they'll find, especially in older houses, little holes that might connect the ceiling down to the room, down to the living room or the kitchen or whatever. And then sometimes when they're coming back in the evening time, after foraging a bit, when they've been out for a couple of hours or back at night, they mightn't find the right hole to go back into in the attic, so they can end up in your house. Try if you can locate the holes that connect up your attic with your downstairs space. You can block those up, all right, and leave the attic space for the bats. And come the first frost, or the first or second frost, around about mid-October or so, the bats will be gone. Okay. If they're really bothering you, and that answer isn't gonna satisfy you, which it mightn't, ring up the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Get on to Glenveigh National Park. They have a whole bunch of rangers at the moment, recently employed over the last couple of years. They've much more resources than they used to have. They just didn't have the staff to deal with an awful lot of these things coming in. But ring up Glenveigh, they'll tell you who your local ranger is, put you in contact with them, and they'll be able to give you some
Having
advice.
bats in the house just sounds a bit creepy, but really they're not doing. They're doing a whole pile of good and not that much harm. But a bit of poop maybe.
Yeah, so the little bat droppings, they look like mouse droppings, but the difference is if you squish them up, it sounds like a strange thing to do, but when you're doing bat surveys, you're trying to figure out they're one of the signs of bats being there, of course, and they'll go to dust as opposed to squishing, which a mouse dropping would, and they don't have any smell unless they're getting damp. So if there's damp getting into your attic, they'll smell all right. But often I've come across many houses where people have bats. Some have been living with them for years and are quite happy. Some haven't known they're there. Because the bats stay in the attic
we were
during
in a
the
house
summer.
a few years ago, and I don't know why he ended up in the attic, and obviously there'd been nobody in the attic for the longest time. But I went in there, and the two ends, it was like piles of bat poop, and it hadn't smelt. It there was no smell of it, and it was dry, and as you describe it there, dusty. Then when it went to clear it away. But two great stacks of it. So there had been bats over a number of years.
Oh, years and years, because they're tiny little creature. Now they do eat a phenomenal amount. Each bat will eat over 3,000 bugs every night, every single night. So if you can imagine, if you have a lot of bats, maybe a dozen, maybe a couple of, maybe a few dozen in your house, in your attic, if you seal up that attic and get rid of those bats in some way, well, that's a huge amount of pest control from around your own garden, around your own fields, that you've just eliminated. So one bat, 3,000. If there's 10 bats in your attic, 30,000 bugs being hoovered up for free around your garden, because they don't fly terribly far. Most of the more common species only go a kilometre or two from where they're roosting. And quite often, if you have some shrubs and trees, they'll be staying in your garden, and they give a wonderful aerial display. I love watching them in the evening.
Yeah, they do. They're very fast, mind you. They're very fast. And they come in, if there's a little hole that they're coming back in, they come in at an unmerciful speed.
Yeah, incredible speed, and they can flatten themselves down to next to nothing. So the more common species, like the pipistrelle species, there's a few of those, they'll fit inside a matchbox when they fold up the little wings. So they really are tiny. And they have to be fast because they have enemies. If they fly out to evening or too early, if it's a long, bright evening and there's still a little bit of light, the sparrowhawk will have enough light to be able to try and catch it. And they're very agile flyers, of course. And then at night time, the owls, the long-eared owls that we have here, and perhaps even occasionally a barn owl, we'll try and hunt them. We don't have many barn owls, unfortunately.
Okay, so really they're doing more good than harm if you can tolerate them, and if you can't, contact.
Yeah, contact the rangers. They'll give you advice. They are legally protected, and the reason they're legally protected is not just to annoy you. It's because they're in bother. Like so much of our biodiversity. We often talk on the show about so many wonderful things that we have in Donegal, all around the northwest in Ireland. But a lot of this stuff is in trouble, and bats are one of those things that are in trouble. And they provide such an important, they call those services that nature do for us for free, they call them ecosystem services. And that's one of those hugely important ecosystem services. If bats disappeared, if we all persecuted them, if we all chased them off, we would then have to replace that pest control issue, which the pests that'll be eating our crops, eating our wildflowers, eating the leaves of our trees. And we'd have to find some way to do that, which inevitably would end up in more chemical use, And
do they get stuck in your hair?
They don't. If they can catch over 3,000 bugs at night in the dark, scooting around the forest, they're not going to crash into my huge head.
Okay. We talked there about berries, and wasps love anything sweet. So, and that would include berries. But there seems to be a lot around at the moment, and they're a real nuisance. Is there more this year, or is there more at this time of the year than normal?
At this time of year, there is. Wasps are they're a hard sell.
They sure are.
Because like everything in nature, they have their place.
What purpose do they serve?
Two main purposes for us. So they pollinate. So a little bit like bees pollinate, because they're looking for nectar. By looking for nectar tends to be the rewards that's at the bottom of a flower. And whatever insect, the butterfly, the wasp, the bee, is looking for that nectar with its sticking out its little tongue, it'll brush past some pollen, and then it'll go to another flower, look for a reward of nectar, and that pollen will get moved from one flower to another. And that's the process of pollination. That's the start of the reproduction process. Without that happening, the flowers won't turn into seeds, and we won't have the next generation of whatever that plant is.
Are they as good a pollinator as bees?
Not as good. Well, at least I suppose it's not their primary function. So pollination is quite important, and we're starting to understand that they pollinate more than we thought previously in the past. But really, the main thing from an ecosystem service, that word again, is pest control. Bit like the bats. Like spiders, like frogs, like bats, like birds, they eat a phenomenal amount of bugs. They have the most amazing little life cycle.
Right. By the sound of things, if it wasn't for creatures like bats and wasps and so on, we'd be overrun with bugs.
Well, we would be overrun. Yeah, we wouldn't be able to produce an awful lot of the plant life that we have. When you think of the wasps, they'll hunt bugs, green flies and spiders in some cases, all sorts of different types of bugs. And they'll feed those to their babies, to the larvae, which are inside the nest. And then the larvae bizarrely secretes this funny kind of sugary carbohydrate, the sugary little food package for the adult. The adult then takes that, so it feeds the larvae the bugs that it's caught off your plants, off your cabbages or your carrots perhaps. And then the larvae gives us this strange secretion, which is very sugary and very sweet. Right. And the adults like that, and they get their energy from that, and they fly off, kill more bugs. and that keeps going.
Are they short of that at the moment, seeing as they're such a nuisance?
That's exactly it, yeah. So at this time of year, the queen is getting worn out. The queen has been producing offspring after offspring after offspring. Some wasps' nests, like the common wasp, can have up to 10,000 individuals in the nest. So, and that's from one queen, which has been very busy. So that queen is now pretty much finished. The new queens are starting to emerge, and all of those worker wasps that were tending the larvae, their job is effectively done, but they're still alive. So you crack open a can of Fanta or some kind of sweet drink, or you've put on a sweet perfume, or you've just been eating chocolate and you've got a bit of chocolate on your fingers. They're going to smell that. They smell the sweetness, just like they're looking for the nectar from the flowers or from the berries, the sweetness from the berries. So they'll come over to you. They're not trying to sting you. They're not trying to attack you, but they're just buzzing around trying to figure out where's this source of sugar.
And the worst thing to do is start flapping about, and it's instinctive, but it's probably the worst thing to do.
It's a very difficult thing to not do, because a wasp sting can give you a good little bang. But if you do, the more you flap around and the more you hit out at it, the more freaked out the wasp gets, of course. And the wasp, it produces a little pheromone, little chemical, which it sends out to all its friends to say, I'm being attacked, and then it defends itself. So try and stay still. If one lands and you can brush it off, of course, but if you're running around in a panic, you're not going to help. One of the best things you can do is put out some little lures for them, a little like our grannies and granddads did in the past. Put out the little bit of jam, the empty pot of jam.
To distract them.
Well, because the sugar they want, so they'll go to that and hopefully stay away from you.
Okay, finally, Aengus, a walk. There's this weekend, is it, in Castlefin?
Walk this weekend, Castlefin, Tidy Towns, along with Law Pro, the local authority water programme, who are paying for this walk. And Castlefin Tidy Towns are great, and they've approached me, and we're going to do a walk and talk about the River Finn and some of the nature that's in the area, really the area, the nature that's around Castlefin. And that's on next Saturday, the 14th, 11 a.m. And we're meeting at the drop-in centre in the middle of Castlefin, and it's free for everybody. There'll be refreshments, there'll be a bit of a talk, a bit of a walk, and we'll explore and see what's out there.
And can people just show up?
And people just show up, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Brilliant.
Aengus.
Super. Thanks, Mil.
Get